guys, it's Joey and this is this week's Celtic Calling. So I've been a little bit unwell this week and so there might be a couple less videos, but I really wanted to do this one and I'm starting to feel a bit better today anyway. So I thought, you know, it's a talky video. It's a talky video. It's not... Sharon is going to kill me. I'm not going to extremes. I'm just gently talking about Macha. So this week we are talking about Macha, and we're going to mostly pull from the Woodfield book for the myth, but because it's obviously the mother aspect of the Morrigan whom I work with, it's going to be a little bit more of a personal, talky, touchy-feely video, I guess, maybe? Sort of. And I wanted to talk about her for a number of reasons. One, she's tying into this week's Ogham, which sort of preludes the Celtic Calling every week, like they tie together with the energies. Two, she's become more and more prevalent in my life recently, and that's not unheard of, but they tend to sort of manifest for when I'm sort of working with them for a particular reason, you know, in their realm of expertise, if you like, or they just tend to pop up every now and again, and that's generally how it works. And then most of the time Morrigan is her whole self, if you like. The sort of, it doesn't even make sense, does it? It's a really difficult thing to sort of get around when she shows up in her generalized sense rather than her specific senses, I guess. So for me, Macha, when she shows up, certain things happen every single time. Horses is the first one. So I knew that something was going on because I had seen in physical contact before I was sick, obviously. I went out for walks and ran into horses every single day. I was like, and the minute I thought that, I had a flash vision of her riding by on a horse and looking at me, nodding and carrying on. The other thing is that anything and everything that I own with horses on it starts showing itself up. So I've got some things down here. So can we see this? Can you see the little horse? The little horse showed up on the necklace, and I have a number of tops with horses on, and literally I was sort of sorting stuff and they started all like falling out. This is a nice one. You see? That one. There are other animals on there as well. Butterflies. Mainly. Birds. And then this one fell out this morning. I was like, okay, I'm listening. This is one of my favourites. You see? Sort of a dark horse, that one. I love that one. Oh, that'll do, because that's me. There's quite a few, there's more down there. And so horse imagery, when, for me, showing up everywhere, and it's not just that. Images everywhere, like on the internet and things. There was a carved statue of a horse head that came up when I was looking at a particular stone I was considering working with this week, and I took that as a sign to work with it this week. And just everywhere, and I was like, okay, I am listening. I will take on board all your messages, and we are going to talk about her in Celtic Calling this week. So we're going to read a little bit from here. Macha connects us to the rich, fertile power of the earth and the vibrant power of the sun. She is both a sun goddess and a goddess of the land. In her darker aspect, she becomes a queen of battle, championing her right to sovereignty and rulership. She actually has 3 distinct roles: as a goddess, as a warrior queen, and as a fairy woman. All three women are regarded in the same person within the mythological cycle, acting as a separate incarnation of her personality. Her name means field or plain, connecting her to the land and its abundance. In the Lebo Gabala Ren, she is described as Macha, greatness of wealth, emphasizing her bountiful nature. Several places bear her name, including Emain Macha, the mythical capital of Ulster, and Ard Macha, the heights of Macha. In her incarnation as a goddess, Macha was the wife of the god Nemet, who is tied into the sun. When the Tuatha De Danann came to Ireland, Nemet cleared several plains and named one for Macha. When she gazed upon the plain, she had a vision of the destruction that would be caused by the Tin and died of a broken heart. She was buried on Ard Macha, now the modern day city of Armagh. Although the goddess Macha dies in this story, her death is not permanent. As we often know within, Celtic mythology, the life, death and rebirth, particularly within land ties, land cycles, the cycles, the seasons, are very much tied up in the cycles of things. And I think from that, we will discuss what I think are really important points. So first and foremost is the idea of her being a sun goddess and having the power of the sun. And I think I'm right in saying citrine is one of her crystals. Yeah, I was right. Good. And we'll, and you quite frequently in modern paganism, I guess, there is very much this definitive idea of Mother Earth and Father Sun, or Mother Earth and Father Sky. I suppose it's technically Mother Earth and Father Sky, and then Goddess Moon and God Sun. And we put those very strict definitions of gender into our practices in a lot of modern paths. And it's something that never ever sat particularly well with me, because for me, divinity is neither male or female and yet both. If I know I'm being abstract and it's going to be one of those moments, but for me there's so much more than our primitive understanding of masculine and feminine. It works with us to work in with them in that scope, because that's how we as human beings understand ourselves and the world around us. And even in language, not in English but in other languages, you can see the masculine and femininity coming into language, so that they define things in terms of masculine and feminine genders, and neutral in certain cases. And that, I think, is really interesting because of the oral tradition of the Celts, and how it's sort of comparing over, it's not that the Celts had oral tradition and they gave specific things male and female, but rather how they didn't. How in the oral tradition of the Celts I think there are more sun goddesses than there are sun gods, and yet there are moon goddesses and moon gods within the Celtic pantheon. So for me, I think limiting our understanding of the powers that be and the powers of nature that we interact with as being solely masculine or solely feminine is a very dangerous thing to do. Or, well, I suppose dangerous is the wrong word. Limiting is probably the right word. You're going to have to bear with me. My brain is like this because I've not been very well. But I think that does limit our experience, our scope, and why shouldn't the glorious, radiant warmth of the sun be feminine as well as masculine? And why shouldn't the mystical, vibrant, mysterious energy of the moon be masculine as well as feminine? Because those energies reside within each and every one of us. The other thing I want to touch on here is we'll talk a little bit more about the tie to the land and sovereignty, But the fact that her very name means field or plain, and she's connected to the land and abundance, we'll later see that, you know, pregnancy is also one of her myths. And quite frequently, the idea of the Morrigan in any aspect being tied to the earth as an earth goddess, a goddess of abundance, life, you know, the idea of fields, of crops growing and things of that nature is not very often recognised. And if it is recognised, people have a very serious disconnect between that and battle. And it's like, well, they can't quite grasp, how can she be a war goddess and an earth goddess at the same time? Well, the Celts felt very strongly about fighting to protect their land. Land was status and life. They, you know, you couldn't, just going to move the camera a little, you couldn't live, and you still can't, without the land, which is a lesson that I think we sorely need to remember. The sacredness of the land to the Celts was part and parcel of their spirituality, and their spirituality tied into everything, including battle. So they saw groves as sacred places where you could hear the words of the gods. They connected to the trees and the energies around them and saw the mystical, magical nature, the spirit, the divine in all the world around them. And therefore Macha was of course tied to the land. And there are myths whereby it is her right to replace the king. And that one we believe that has been watered down is probably the most famous, is of Morgana Le Fay trying to replace an older king whom she had seen as failing with a younger, more virile one, and that becomes demonized in that story. But the original reason for that being is because of the interconnectedness in the Celtic mind between the king who was ruling and the abundance of the land which he ruled, or queen. And it was the Morrigan's right, if the land was suffering, if the Celts were suffering, to replace that king with a younger, more virile, more fit king who would look after the land. Macha's other incarnations are both connected to Ermain Macha, the capital of Ulster, and how it came to be named after the goddess. In the first version of the myth, Macha appears as the mortal queen, Macha Monrud, or Macha of the red tresses. I always see her with red hair. Very dark red hair, but I always see her with red hair. She was the daughter of King Eadrud, who ruled Ireland along with two other kings. Each king ruled for an allotted 7-year cycle in order to maintain peace in the land. This arrangement worked until Ead drowned. As the Morrigan is also a river goddess and has several connections to water, the manner of his death may indicate that Ead was an unworthy ruler and his drowning was a way for the goddess to remove him as king, which is something we mentioned earlier. As Ead's only heir, Macha attempts to take her rightful place as queen when it is Ead's turn to rule, but the other two kings refuse to let a woman rule alongside them. Enraged, Macha promptly goes to war with both kings and defeats them. She asserts her right to sovereignty over the land and in this case takes it by force, by war. So that's a very, very simple way in which land and abundance ties into warfare. After Macha had ruled it for 7 years, the original allotted time, one of the kings, Dithorba's sons, came to court and demanded that she handed over the kingship to them. She refused them, saying, "Not by favour did I obtain it, but by force in the battlefield." The sons then raised an army and attacked the queen, but once again Macha goes to war to defend her sovereignty. As they are unable to defeat her, Dithorba's sons flee. After much searching, Macha finds them in the woods of Connaught. She appears to them as disguised as an old leper, and they unwittingly invite her to share their meal. Despite her appearance, the sons find themselves lusting after her, and she subsequently leads each of them into the woods to lie with her. One by one she binds them so they can't speak or move, and then returns to Ulster with the men in chains. Instead of killing them, she forces them to build the fort Emain Macha in her honour. The manner in which she instructs the men to build the fort hints at her divine nature. Macha takes off her brooch and makes an outline on the ground to show them the dimensions to which the fort should be built. Thus was the outline of the fort described by the woman. When she was sitting, she took her pin from her garment to measure around with her pin. The reference to Macha's gigantic stature indicates her extraordinary nature. We saw a similar reference to gigantic stature when the Morrigan mates with Dagda, with 1 foot on either side of the river Eunice. Yeah. Trickery by seduction. Sorry, it's just, I shouldn't be giggling at it. It's good though. I enjoy these sorts of stories, they're funny. And so men try to take away what is hers by right because she fought for it, trying to force their rules on her after they had already denied their rules to her. So she had to go to war, she took the land by force, and then they try and come back and say they after 7 years, and she's like, nope, I am the rightful sovereign, I took it by force, by war. And that ties into the whole Celtic sort of rights. Once you had conquered something, you had the rights to it, you were sovereign over it, you know, and that land was hers. And even though these sons try and attack her, they can't. And by wiles, and I'm gonna take a leap here and say that it's about shaming them at that point, because both of them felt lust for a leper, and even back then that would have been a bizarre thing in the myth. And someone who is unfirm and physically ill as an outward symptom of their inner self, perhaps, in Celtic mindset, they weren't healthy. There was disease there. It wasn't a healthy individual within themselves, and yet both freely go to sleep with the leper and find themselves bound, and they cannot speak or move. So it's sort of a shamed punishment, like you ran away, you fled, you hid in the woods, you tried to sleep with an old leper, and now you're coming back with me to build something in my honour, and you're completely defeated on every level, on a physical level, on a mental level, on an emotional level. And then their punishment is to fortify her position. Okay. In Macha's third incarnation, she is depicted as a fairy woman who marries the widowed farmer Crunch. I really don't want to call him Crunchy, but that's what it looks like. Tempted to call him Crunchy anyway, that's awesome. Macha appears at his doorstep one day and immediately begins putting the task of sorting his household and puts his life into proper order. She does all the chores and then shares his bed. Crunchy's fields and herds prosper in her presence, and she becomes pregnant with twins, all signs of her fertile nature. This is the main story of her as a mother, I think. Before Crunchy left to go to a fair, Macha made him promise not to boast about her to anyone. Having remained at home, and Crunchy left with the intention of keeping his promise, but once at the fair he naturally forgets it and boasts that his wife can run faster than the King of Ulster's horses. The king overhears him and imprisons the farmer, intending to humiliate him. The king then has Macha brought before him and orders her to race his horses in order to save her husband's life. Heavily pregnant, Macha appeals to the king and the men of Ulster to wait until she gave birth before making her run the race, crying, "Help me, for a mother bore each one of you." However, her pleas are ignored and she's forced to race the king's horses. She wins the race, afterwards falling to the ground and giving birth to the twins, thus the name Ime Macha, or the twins of Macha. With her last breath, she curses Ulster's men for 9 generations to feel the pains of childbirth whenever their strength was most needed. From this hour, the ignominy that you have inflicted upon me will rebound to the shame of each of you. When a time of oppression falls on you, each one of you will be overcome with weakness, as the weakness of a woman in childbirth, and this will remain upon you for 5 days and 4 nights to the 9th generation. This curse plays a major role in the Táin, incapacitating the men of Ulster while Maeve's army attacks. Interestingly, the hero Cuchulainn, the only man in Ulster immune to her curse, had a horse named Leith Macha, or the Grey of Macha. The horse was believed to be a gift from Macha and mysteriously rose out of the pool of Lin Leith, making it a creature of the other worlds. So, again we have the shaming of men, and it's tied again into battle. That they are unable to fight and protect themselves or defend themselves or prove their honour. And it's taking away their manhood in a very real sense, because they showed her no mercy, no compassion. They forced her to run while pregnant, which is horrendous when you really think about it. And the horse imagery here is tied in on a number of occasions. You know, the horses that she's forced to race, as well as the hero Cuchulainn's horse, believed to be gifted from Macha. The horse is a solar symbol, which ties back to the earlier connection that we talked about with her having a solar goddess aspect. Now, whether she's depicted as a fairy woman here because the myth had been written down and sort of filtered down and changed rather than her being a goddess is questionable. There's no other signs anywhere here of sort of fae-like activity, although she does, I believe, fall in love with a mortal man and sorts his house out for him, which is, I guess, very motherly, and sorts his life out for him, which is very motherly, and bears his children. Blood on the land as well. She gave birth on the land, obviously. Is something for me which I see a common thread in a lot of Celtic mythology with the idea of blood on the land. Now, blood is very much tied in with the Morrigan, and it's also tied in with the idea of fertility, childbirth, and life force being in the blood. And so I think I've mentioned this in another video somewhere, but for me the spilling of blood on land is also something tied into the Celtic consciousness of the land then taking the life force from men. So as it was Morrigan's right to take the lives of the slain and take them into the other world, it could also be seen that because the Morrigan is the land, and Macha in particular in this circumstance, is the land itself, within the land is divinity, that the absorbing of the blood through the battlefields and things of that nature actually took on the life force and sort of the great cycles, you know, to be reborn, the energy cycles. And, you know, to be, the shame of her giving birth was then transformed into that, you know, into that childbirth, into that blood, and that sort of strengthens the curse that she places upon them and their children. Macha was also connected to crows, specifically the Royston crow or hooded crow. In this form she was believed to fly over battlefields and instigate fighting. Both of her totems, the horse and crow, reflect her dual functions as a goddess of fertility, abundance, and of death. The crow is traditionally linked to death and prophecy, 2 attributes Macha displays in her multiple incarnations. Macha possesses an uncanny ability to return from the dead, as well as the ability to foresee future events. As the warrior queen Macha Monrod, she is a goddess of battle, dispensing death to her enemies. As the fairy woman, her connection to the horse reflects her abilities to bring abundance. Horses were symbols of fertility and wealth, which her presence bring to Crunchu's land. Horses ploughed fields, connecting them to the wealth of the land, and were also used in welfare, connecting them to the cycle of death. In the Macha the Mother, Cuchulain's horse and a gift from Macha was said to be the king of horses, and like the namesake, it was fierce in battle, killing 50 men with its teeth and 30 with each of its hooves while attempting to protect its fallen master. As a goddess of the sun, Macha's golden rays bring fertility and new life to the land. She is described in the Dishanshas as Macha who diffused all excellences, the sun of womankind, and her two names, not seldom heard in the West, were Bright Grain and Pure Macha. Here Macha is connected to the sun and is equated with another sun goddess, Grain. Her association with horses, a solar animal, reaffirms the connection. The Celts linked horses with wealth, fertility, and the sun, as did many other cultures. While we tend to think of the sun representing the masculine and the moon as feminine, the Celts saw the sun as neither absolutely male nor absolutely female, and there are several male and female sun gods in the pantheon, as we talked about. However, the majority of them are actually female. The connection between the horse goddess and the sun can also be found in Macha's counterpart, the Welsh Rhiannon, a horse goddess who is clothed in gold and silks, also representing rays of the sun. Macha was also associated with the severed heads of battle, which Cormac's glossary, an early Irish glossary containing the etymologies and meanings of outdated words, referred to as the masts of Macha or Macha's acorn crop. Ugh. The light's gone really weird. I apologise for that. Sun's gone in. Mesrat Machi, the masts of Macha, the heads of Macha, or those who have been slaughtered. The Celts believed that a person's soul resided in their head, and the severed heads of enemies were often displayed on war chariots. Yum. This corresponds to the Morrigan's role as a harvester of souls, and taking the heads of fallen warriors would have been a symbolic act of collecting souls in order to bring them to the other world. Masts can also refer to acorns as well as other nuts. Wild acorns were used to feed pigs, and ancient people gathered them as a food source. As a reference to actual acorns, masts refers to sustenance and the goddess of the land providing for her people. As a goddess of fertility and the sun, call on her abundance and to face life's challenges. Call upon Macha. She is a goddess of justice, especially in regard to crimes committed against women. She can be a powerful ally to those who have been abused. Due to her powers of prophecy, she is also an excellent goddess to invoke when doing any kind of divination. And then there are correspondences which I guess we can cover. Red, brown, vervain, oats, coltsfoot, garnet, clear quartz, citrine, full moon, waxing moon, midday summer, harvest festivals, horse and crow. Ooh. So let's have that's a long chitter chatter from the book, isn't it? So I guess that we will finish up with some of my thoughts, some of my experiences, like I promised. So Macha was originally the goddess I had the most trouble with, aspect of the Morrigan, I guess, to connect to, which I've said before, and I think for me it's because in a lot of ways I have difficulty with the mother archetype for all sorts of personal reasons of my own. And part and parcel of connecting with Macha is to help me overcome that. And when I thought about it, I had always sort of spoken to divinity and called divinity Mother. Always. Even from being very, very young, and my mother used to have a huge go at me for it. It's male. It's neither. It's both. So whenever Macha shows up, there are a lot of horses, as I have said, and it's tying into her role as the sun, her role as sovereign, the connection between the land abundance, fertility and war is all wrapped up in that horse totem for me, as the most strong example of how it crosses over between land and war. The Celts, basically the Celts saw the horse as probably one of the, if not the most important thing in winning wars. They were a symbol of status, of wealth. They were fierce and well trained to go into war. They also ploughed the land and were to, you can make so many connections, manure, if you like, that being tied up with fertility of land and things of that nature. Man and horse have worked alongside each other for a very long time, and they have an incredible and beautiful energy to them. I don't think there's any animal that is quite as giving to the history of mankind as horses. You can make arguments for dogs and things, but in every aspect of life, I think horses have stayed with man. They have been with man in the farming, in the fields, and in the war, and travel, adventure, all those sorts of things. And Macha sort of ties into those energies as well as a mother, for me. She's very supportive, but she's not ever going to be a fluff type mother. She's not a cooing over you mother. She's the kind of mother that says, you can do this, get up, fight on, you can. And quite frequently when she showed up for me, she said things like, you're going to be okay. And I'm always like, oh God. But she radiates light and warmth and protective nature, just like the solar energies. She radiates sun and warmth and protection. She envelops you in that warmth and helps lift you up and keep you going. A bit like the sun helping things to grow, she keeps helping you grow and become who you were meant to be. And then on the flip side of this, she's very much tied into the role of justice and sovereignty, both of which incredibly solar-based energies. If you look into what magic to is, quite frequently you will see sun energy and the correspondences all tied up with those notions of sovereignty and success and justice. Which is a question for the human psyche, I guess, why we connect those things up. But for me, through Macha, it all makes huge amounts of sense. She is the light. She is the light that allows a man's actions to be justly rewarded or justly punished. And that is seen in both of, well, not in both, in all of these stories. Cuchulainn, the huge hero of Morrigan. That's a I realise he has his moments, but she gifts him with the king of horses, whereas the men of Ulster, childbirth pains for 9 generations based on their actions, based on who they are as men, based on their honour. She sees them, she brings light to them, she showers light upon them and shows them for who they are. And that, of course, ties into notions of the land and of justice. She shines her light upon the land, and the land flourishes. Abundance comes from her being so interconnected, interwoven with the land, and that's tying back into that blood theory of mine again, that blood on the land is just another symbol of how man and land are connected, and even more so then, perhaps, than we are now. Although we all return to the earth in one form or another. And so she, of course, as with all the aspects of the Morrigan, is not simply one aspect. She has her death aspect, as we quite clearly see, but for me all the aspects flow into one another, and you can find elements of each within. You can find elements of Maiden, Mother and Crone within each aspect of the Morrigan. They aren't stagnant, they aren't archetypes, they are constantly flowing, evolving, changing, moving, flowing, blah, 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 like this, apparently. And for me, Macha has been a guiding light to show me that what a mother should be, how a mother energy should feel, and how the kind of mother I hope to be someday. Strong, protective, lioness-like, helping to encourage, helping to love, but help you see yourself in the best possible way and put you in the position to be the best possible person that you can be. So that's going to be it for this video. I'm going to go rest up now. Many blessings.